Yes, ma'am.
In 5, 4, 3.
In 2012, the Pew Research Center released a report called Nuns on the Rise. They identified these individuals as people who, when they're filling out a form and they're asked to check off what's their religious affiliation, these individuals would go through the list, and then down at the bottom of the list, there'd be an option for none. And so they'd mark off none. A full 1/3 of adults under the age of 30 marked this off, identifying themselves as not affiliating with a particular religious denomination or religious affiliation. And so this, for scholars of religion, this is quite interesting, because the trend is expected to continue with more and more people not identifying with a particular religious affiliation. Of course, in the big cultural battles of what this means, a lot of people assume this means people are more identifying with atheism or agnosticism, but this is not necessarily the case. In fact, 68% of those who identified as nuns still claimed that they believed in some higher power, some divine force. And so the question then becomes, what does all of this mean? In a study, in a book rather, written by Crystal Manning, called Losing Our Religion. This book specifically talks about how these self-identified nuns are raising their children. The common perception is that a lot of these parents would be hostile to religion, but that's not necessarily the case. What Manning found in her book is that a lot of these individuals who identify as nuns are raising their children in a religious positive environment. What that means is, while they themselves, these nuns, don't identify with the religion, and they're not raising their children to identify with the religion, they're allowing their children to make up their own minds. And so that, of course, brings us to, what does this mean for Catholic schools? More and more students in the Catholic school system we're finding, similar to the Pew Research Center, don't identify with a particular religion. I would say also this applies to young teachers, up and coming young teachers. So one of the things that I think gets to the heart of the matter in all of this is, how can we as Catholic educators reach out to these individuals who identify as none, who identify as having no religious identification? I think this is what's really important, and I think this opens up the door for a lot of really good things to talk about in terms of theology and how we reach out to those who don't identify with a particular religious denomination. In the Second Vatican Council, one of the major documents that came out of the council was a document called Gaudium et Spes, or the Church in the Modern World. And one of the paragraphs that come from that document, which I think is germane here, is this. It says, "In every age, the Church carries the responsibility of reading the signs of the times and of interpreting them in light of the gospel, if it is to carry out its task. The Church is convinced that there is a great variety of help that it can receive from the world in preparing the ground of the gospel, both from individuals and from society as a whole, by their talents and activity." For me, what that says is that the Church is open to the idea of learning from things of the world, things that aren't necessarily religious. For me, what I look to is pop culture. I think pop culture is a very good place that we as theologians can go to help create a dialogue around theological issues that aren't necessarily theological. So for instance, if we think of popular television shows, a show like Westworld, or any sort of show or film that deals with science fiction, specifically with artificial intelligence, can open up the door to a really meaningful conversation of what it means to be a human being. This touches on issues of theological anthropology, of what does it mean to be made in the image and likeness of God? What does it mean to have human dignity? And a show like Westworld can really open up that conversation. A show like Game of Thrones, where you can look at, the whole series looks at a variety of leadership styles. What does it mean to be a Christian leader? It of course also goes into questions of ethics. What is right Christian behavior? And using those characters in that show as models of Christian, or in a lot of the cases, non-Christian leadership styles. Or a show like Stranger Things that looks at issues of friendship. What does it mean to belong to a group of people? What is it to work for community as opposed towards individualism? And what does the church have to say about that? So that sort of gives you an idea of taking something that's in the popular culture and allow it to become a dialogue partner for theology. But there are some things that can help us in this. One is something that's quite easy that most people do already, is become familiar with what's happening in the culture. If you watch TV, if you watch movies, if you listen to music, you're already in conversation with what's going on in the culture. And then finally, learn about work that's being done around this topic. A lot of theologians and religious thinkers put a lot of effort into having popular culture be in dialogue with theology. And in my study guide, I make reference to a lot of websites and books that can help with this. Some cautions in using popular culture. I'm speaking specifically of films and of television shows. Is only use a clip or a portion of the film or the show. There's no need to show an entire film or an entire episode. I think this is particularly important because one of the bad raps that popular film often gets in religion classes or theological forums is that it becomes sort of a filler. So you show the whole film as a way to just fill time. And that's not necessarily helpful. So make sure that you're only showing a clip or a portion of the film or show. Related to a parallel concept in Scripture. So if a particular show is dealing, say, with leadership, where in Scripture do we find examples of leadership? And then related to a parallel concept in Catholic theology, using church documents or church teaching or various theologians talking about that particular topic. And then finally, I think the most important step is with students, either whether these are young students, high school students, or even adult learning, get dialogue started. Have a conversation with those individuals to get them talking about these issues. Let me give you an example. There's two ways of approaching this. You can do this, what I say, with kind of overt religious ideas or unovert. And what I mean by that is, like, obviously movies that deal in religious themes. So for instance, if we were having a conversation on Christology, what does being the Christ mean? One of the things that I find helpful is show a clip from 3 different films on the life of Jesus. So for instance, you could look at a clip from Jesus Christ Superstar, where Jesus is portrayed as being very much one of the people. He's very much at ease among his disciples. He's very much one of them. And then contrast that with, say, something like Franco Zeffirelli's miniseries, Jesus of Nazareth, particularly those scenes where Zeffirelli shows Jesus doing these powerful miracles. And then contrast that third one with Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ, which presents a very human, very fallible Jesus. And then open up that conversation on Christology and get students talking about what does it mean to call ourselves Christians and to look towards Jesus, and maybe even have a conversation on the different gospels, how the different gospels portray Christ. Another good example I could use for using, even though I said in the earlier to use only clips of films, here you can use an entire film, like say The Prince of Egypt, have students watch it, and then actually read the book of Exodus and do a sort of compare and contrast. So those two examples are examples of overt religious themes. Obviously, movies on Jesus' life, biblical films are ways in which we can get students talking and thinking theologically. But even if we move away from the realms of theology, from overt religious movies, something like The Lion King, for instance. There's a scene in The Lion King where Rafiki is talking to Simba, and he's telling him about his father, Mustafa. And there's a scene where where Simba looks into the river and he sees an image of himself, and it transforms into his father, and his father offers him some advice about finding himself. Even though that's not a religious movie and it's not a religious scene, it's a really good way to look into issues of what is our identity as Catholics? Who are we as people of God? It's a good way to get students talking about even issues, if they're, depending on age appropriateness, issues of confirmation. What does it mean to confirm myself as a Christian, as a Catholic? What does it mean when I look at myself and I see the history, I see the ancestors of people who've come before me in the faith? So again, a really simple explanation of a theological topic using a film that's not necessarily theological. So a really good way of doing that. And finally, my hope, my wish, my desire, the heart of the matter for me is, can we look, and I think we can, at what's going on in the world, what's going on popularly in the lives of people we come into contact with, and engage them, even those who aren't necessarily identifying with a particular religious denomination, and help them to see that there is religious meaning. Because I'm a firm believer that even though people don't claim not to have a religious affiliation, they're still looking for meaning, still searching for those areas in their life that transcend their own experience. And I think using popular culture, popular film, popular music, and television shows are a really good way to do this.